The wind screamed across the white ridges of Tarkesh IX, dragging flurries of snow like shards of glass across the alien encampment. Rows of plasma turrets blinked dimly through the storm, their cores sputtering against the relentless cold. Inside the forward command shelter, General Tarkesh flexed his chitin-plated fingers and hissed in frustration as another weapon's display flickered to black. The Galactic Expeditionary Force, composed of 12 species and centuries of military brilliance, had been reduced to shivering behind half-dead shields. He could smell the bitter scent of failing circuitry. The door seals groaned open and a gust of frigid air swept in with the newcomers. 5 humans stepped through, wrapped in bulky parkas that looked more suited for mountain climbing than war. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with frost gathering in his beard, pulled down his hood and nodded once. "Sergeant Mason, Terran Defense Exchange," he said. His voice was calm, almost casual, as if he were reporting to a campfire rather than an alien general. Tarkesh's secondary eyes narrowed. "You are late, human, and under-equipped. Where are your plasma rifles, your drones?" Mason shrugged the heavy pack from his shoulder. "Didn't bring any. They don't like the cold." The alien officer beside Tarkesh emitted a rasping laugh. "Then what do you fight with?" "Stones." Mason reached into the pack and drew out a long, matte black weapon. A simple rifle, metal, not composite. Its design was inelegant, brutal. "Brass and lead," he said. "They don't freeze." Around him, the aliens exchanged disbelieving looks. Plasma and energy had ruled the battlefield for millennia. No one had carried such relics outside a museum. Tarkesh's crest rippled with disdain. "You intend to win this campaign with toys from your species' dark age." The human's mouth curved in a faint smile. "You asked for help. We brought what works." Outside, the storm intensified. Snow hammered against the shelter walls with the rhythm of distant drums. Somewhere in the blizzard, a deep, resonant screech echoed, long, metallic, and alive. The noise made every alien stiffen. Mason noticed. "That your enemy?" Tarkesh flicked his tail in irritation. "The Vrask. Machine spawn. They burrow beneath the ice and rise without warning. Our sensors detect them only seconds before the strike. They drain our shields and infect our circuitry with parasitic code. Plasma weapons jam, drones fall. We fight blind." Mason knelt beside a malfunctioning turret, pried open its access plate, and whistled softly at the burnt wiring. "You built smart weapons," he murmured, "and they found a smarter virus." He rose and brushed snow from his gloves. "Sometimes dumb is better." Tarkesh hissed. "You think crude bullets will stop armor that laughs at plasma?" "Let's hope we don't have to find out," Mason said, though his tone carried no fear. He turned to his small team. They began unloading sealed crates from the sled that had followed them through the storm. Each crate bore stenciled words in fading Terran script, letters unknown to most of the galaxy. As the humans worked, the aliens huddled around their flickering heaters, muttering about primitive species and misplaced confidence. Mason ignored them. His movements were methodical, almost reverent, as he checked the oiling on his rifle's bolt, then inspected the heavy ammunition belts coiled like metallic serpents inside the largest crate. A young alien trooper approached, curiosity overcoming ridicule. "Human, why do you still use projectiles when the galaxy has moved beyond them?" Mason looked up, eyes reflecting the dim blue of the emergency lights. "Because when everything else stops working, this still fires." He tapped the rifle's receiver. No circuits, no charge packs, just chemistry and gravity. The trooper tilted his head. "Barbaric, efficient," Mason corrected. An alarm suddenly howled through the camp, slicing off further conversation. Red lights flared, painting the interior in blood tones. A scout's voice crackled through the comms. "Movement beneath the ice. Multiple signatures. North Ridge." Tarkesh barked orders, but half the consoles refused to respond. Sparks flew as a control panel overloaded. Outside, the ground trembled. Mason could feel it through his boots, a rhythmic vibration growing stronger with each pulse. He stepped into the storm without hesitation. The air stabbed his face with frozen needles. Visibility was down to a few meters, but the vibrations underfoot spoke louder than sight. His team followed, dragging one of the larger crates through the snow. They set it near the ridge, anchored it with steel spikes, and pried off the lid. Inside gleamed a cluster of rotating barrels, thick as a man's arm, and belts of brass-jacketed rounds stacked like coiled thunder. Mason's gloved hand traced the weapon's cold metal. "Old bird's been waiting for another flight," he muttered. Behind him, the aliens stumbled through the snow, struggling with their faltering plasma rifles. Tarkesh shouted over the wind, "What is that contraption?" "GU 19A," Mason answered. "Used to sit under a helicopter back home. Fires about 2,000 rounds a minute. Not pretty, but it gets the job done." The alien general's mandibles clicked. "You plan to use that relic against the Vrask?" "Madness." "Maybe," Mason said, feeding the first belt into the gun. "But sometimes madness scares monsters." A low rumble rolled across the valley, and the snow at the ridge cracked open. Shards of ice erupted upward as a colossal Vrask dragged itself into view, its carapace studded with frozen armor, eyes burning like blue plasma orbs. It shrieked, a sound that made the mountains tremble. The alien soldiers staggered backward in terror as smaller shapes swarmed behind the behemoth. Mason's face hardened. "Positions," he shouted to his team. The humans crouched around the mounted weapon, checking the feed, locking the tripod, sealing their goggles. He exhaled once, slow and steady, and gripped the trigger housing. The Vrask advanced, screeching through the blizzard. Around them, alien plasma weapons sputtered uselessly, their energy dying in the cold. Mason's finger rested lightly on the trigger, the barrels ready to spin. The storm howled, the monsters screamed, and the humans waited in silence. When the first Vrask lunged within range, Mason whispered, "Let's see if you still laugh at old toys." The weapon's motor growled to life, a rising mechanical roar that drowned out the wind, and for a heartbeat, even the monsters hesitated. The storm itself seemed to pause, holding its breath for what was about to come. The Gatling gun erupted with a sound that devoured the storm. 6 barrels spun in a blazing vortex, hurling molten lead into the advancing Vrask. Fire bloomed across the snowfield, each bullet tracing a comet's path through the blizzard. The first wave of creatures disintegrated under the torrent, their armor plates torn apart like fragile bark. For the alien soldiers watching from behind shattered barricades, it was not battle, it was annihilation. Mason stood anchored behind the roaring weapon, his boots buried in the churned snow. Every vibration from the firing mechanism coursed through his body like a second heartbeat. He shouted range corrections to his team over the deafening growl, his words lost but understood through motion and instinct. Hot brass clattered against the ice, piling at their feet in rivers of steam. The machine's fury carved glowing lines across the white plain, each rotation leaving a rhythm of thunder that refused to stop. General Tarkesh watched from a ridge, half blinded by the brilliance. His soldiers had dropped their powerless plasma rifles, transfixed by the relentless mechanical storm. For cycles, the galaxy had measured progress by precision and efficiency. This was neither. It was brute persistence, metal and noise, a living engine of defiance. "How could such a crude thing wield so much destruction?" he muttered. One of his lieutenants stammered. "It should have overheated, melted itself apart." Tarkesh could only stare as Mason adjusted the ammunition belt, his movements exact, unhurried. Every gesture told the same story. A human who had fought before and long ago learned that fear wasted time. Another wave of Vrask burst from beneath the snow, smaller but faster. They zigzagged toward the human position, claws slicing through ice. Mason barked, "Cover, reload." One of his teammates swung his rifle up, a rhythmic crack cutting through the chaos. The simple weapon spat brass and smoke, dropping 2 Vrask mid-charge. Mason slammed the next belt into place and hit the trigger again. The Gatling roared back to life, drowning every other sound. The air itself seemed to recoil from its voice. The monster screamed, high-pitched and metallic, their bodies twisting under impacts that left trails of molten fluid. Snow hissed where the glowing remains fell. Steam and smoke merged into a wall that turned the world into light and shadow. Mason's goggles fogged, but his hands never faltered. "Keep feeding," he shouted, and another belt slid into the weapon's hungry chamber. From behind the line, the aliens began to recover from their awe. They shouted in their guttural languages, pointing toward the enemy ranks breaking apart. Hope, something they had nearly forgotten, stirred among them. Tarkesh, gripping his ceremonial blade, finally understood that this human weapon was more than a tool. It was conviction made visible. Mason's voice carried over the gun's roar. "Don't let them regroup." He adjusted the firing angle, the rotating barrels tracking the Vrask as they tried to retreat. The Gatling swept across the horizon in wide arcs, chewing through enemy formations until the snowfield became a molten scar. One of the Vrask leapt high, landing atop a ruined turret. Mason swung the barrels and fired for barely half a second. The creature vanished in a flash of sparks and vapor. The weapon began to slow, its barrels glowing a dangerous red. Mason eased off the trigger, the thunder dying to a growl. He exhaled through clenched teeth, the smell of burnt metal thick in the air. Around him, the aliens crept forward cautiously, their eyes wide. They stepped over carcasses that still smoked from the kinetic assault. The snow had turned black in places, scorched by heat rather than plasma. Tarkesh descended the ridge, his breath fogging through his mask vents. "You have silenced an army," he said, voice hoarse. Mason checked the gun's temperature gauge, then the remaining ammunition. "Not silenced," he corrected, "just paused. They'll come again. They always do." Tarkesh studied the humans for a long moment. "You fight like machines," he said quietly. Mason met his gaze. "No, machines fight until they fail. We fight until we win." The general nodded, unsure whether it was admiration or fear he felt. The humans began reloading, working in unison without orders. Their coordination seemed almost instinctive, each anticipating the other's needs. They were dirty, exhausted, and efficient. An organism made of willpower. A faint tremor rippled through the ice beneath them. The Vrask were not gone. They were regrouping underground. Mason heard it too. He crouched beside the gun, pressing a gloved hand to the frozen surface. The vibrations were spreading, wider, deeper. He frowned. "They're tunneling to flank us." Tarkesh activated what few scanners still functioned. The display flickered but confirmed it. Dozens of signatures moving beneath the surface, encircling the camp. "They mean to bury us," he hissed. "Then we don't wait for them to pop up," Mason said. He ordered his team to reposition the gun at a downward angle toward a fissure in the ice. They wrestled with the heavy frame, muscles straining. When it locked into place, Mason loaded the last belt, every round glinting like a promise. "Back up," he warned. The aliens complied, their instincts telling them something unprecedented was about to happen. Mason aimed at the fissure, waited for the faintest shift of shadow beneath, then squeezed the trigger. The Gatling shrieked again, its barrels spinning faster than before, discharging a continuous storm of bullets into the ground. The ice shattered, collapsing inward as explosions of superheated air and splintered bone erupted upward. Cracks raced across the field like lightning veins. The Vrask that had tried to flank them were torn apart in their tunnels, the concussive force rippling through the glacier. When silence finally fell, the snow drifted down again, hesitant, as if wary of the weapon that had rewritten the laws of war. Steam coiled from the Gatling's barrels. Mason stepped back, chest heaving, face expressionless. Around him, the alien stared not at the destruction, but at him. This human who stood calm amid the wreckage he had wrought. Tarkesh approached slowly. "Our greatest weapons failed," he said. "Yours endures." Mason knelt, checking the feed mechanism, his voice steady. "Endurance isn't built into the weapon," he said. "It's built into the one pulling the trigger." The general considered this, the phrase etching itself into his mind. The humans had brought no miracles, no new technology. They had brought persistence, the one thing no machine could replicate. A low, distant rumble echoed across the mountains, too steady to be natural. Mason looked toward the horizon where the storm thickened again. The Vrask were not finished. Something larger was moving beneath the clouds. He rose, wiping frost from his goggles. "Round two," he murmured. Torkith followed his gaze and felt a chill beyond the cold. The human hadn't celebrated, hadn't even smiled. He was already thinking of the next fight. The general realized then that the true weapon humanity wielded was not the gun, but the mind behind it. The sky cleared by degrees, the storm's fury spent. In its wake lay a silence, so heavy it felt sacred. The snowfield stretched unbroken except for the scars of battle, blackened craters, shattered ice, and the twisted remains of the Vrask. Steam rose from the wreckage, curling into the morning air like the ghosts of machines. Mason stood beside the gun, his hands blackened from oil and powder. Around him, the alien soldiers moved quietly, reverently, as if afraid to disturb the field that had birthed a legend. General Torkith approached through the drifting haze, his armor scored with cracks from the fight. "The sensors report no further movement," he said. His voice was subdued, not triumphant but uncertain. "Are they gone?" Mason shook his head, eyes on the horizon. "Nothing that's smart disappears forever. They'll wait, evolve, come back stronger." He wiped a smear of soot across his cheek with the back of his glove. "But for now, they know we can hurt them." The general's gaze fell to the weapon still anchored in the snow. Its barrels were warped from heat, its frame scarred, but it remained upright, a defiant monument. "Your machine should not have survived that," Torkith murmured. "No plasma cannon could have fired so long without failure." Mason gave a faint, tired smile. "That's because it wasn't built to impress. It was built to last." One of the younger alien soldiers approached, hesitant, his iridescent armor dimmed with frost. "Human," he said softly, "we saw you fight while everything else failed. You were calm. Even when they surrounded us, you did not fear." Mason looked at him, eyes pale under his hood. "Fear's natural," he said. "You just learn to move through it. Fear reminds you you're alive, and being alive means you still have a chance to fight." The soldier considered this, then touched the Gatling gun's side with something close to reverence. "You call this a weapon," he said, "but it looks like a creature, angry, unstoppable." Mason crouched beside the gun, running his hand over the cold metal. "It's not alive," he said. "It's just a tool. The monster's the one using it." Torkith's mandibles twitched at the words. He understood now what his scanners could not measure. What made these humans dangerous was not their machines, but their refusal to surrender. "Our fleet will speak of this day for cycles," he said. "They will call it the day of the Thunder Gun." "Call it what you want," Mason replied. "Just remember why it worked." He straightened, scanning the battlefield one last time. "We didn't need perfect weapons. We needed ones that worked when the perfect ones didn't." The general nodded slowly, a new respect settling in his gaze. "Perhaps your kind will teach us more than tactics." Mason allowed himself a weary chuckle. "You'd be surprised what humans can teach if you give them a cold enough reason." The soldiers began to pack the remnants of their camp. The storm had stripped the trees to bare spines and left the mountains glazed in ice, yet a strange warmth settled over the survivors. They moved with renewed purpose, their gestures steadier, their posture less defeated. Hope had returned, carried on the sound of a weapon that had spoken in thunder. As Mason oversaw the disassembly of the Gatling gun, Torkith lingered. "Will you rebuild it?" "Of course," Mason said. "You don't throw away something that's earned your trust." He paused, watching steam coil from the barrels. "She'll fire again. She always does." The general studied him, then asked quietly, "Do all humans speak of their weapons as living things?" Mason gave a half-smile. "Only the ones that save lives." The last of the Vrask wreckage was loaded onto sleds for study. Alien engineers photographed the human gun, documenting every bolt, every scorch mark. They argued among themselves about the physics, the sheer impossibility of its sustained fire. Mason ignored their chatter. He had heard it all before. Every new battlefield came with disbelief first, respect second. When the last of the supplies were secured, Torkith extended a clawed hand. You have my gratitude, Mason of Earth. Without you, this campaign would have ended in ruin. Mason gripped his forearm firmly. You'd have found another way. You just needed a reminder that the simplest way still works. The general's eyes flickered, unsure if it was humility or pride that stirred in him. Your species confuses me, he admitted. You build monsters, yet speak of peace. You destroy, yet claim to protect. Mason glanced toward the snow-covered horizon, where the morning sun bled through the mist. We don't like fighting, he said, but we're good at it. We had to be. He paused, voice softening. When you've survived your own worst nightmares, other monsters stop feeling new. Torkith regarded him in silence. The human's words carried the weight of memory. Wars fought not for glory, but for endurance. It was a kind of strength the galaxy had forgotten. When the transport ship descended, its thrusters scattering the snow, Mason and his team loaded the weapon aboard. As the ramp closed, the aliens saluted in unison. It was not the stiff, ceremonial gesture of their ranks, but something deeper, a recognition of shared survival. Mason returned it with a small nod. The ship lifted off, engines humming low. Through the viewport, the battlefield shrank until it was just a white scar beneath the mountains. The alien soldiers stood like dark figures etched into the snow, watching until the vessel vanished into the clouds. Inside the cargo bay, Mason sat beside the mounted gun, the hum of the ship blending with the faint crackle of cooling metal. His team rested nearby, silent, each lost in thought. He reached out and patted the weapon's casing once, the gesture almost tender. You did good, old girl, he murmured. Outside, lightning flickered along the horizon, distant, harmless. Yet to Mason it sounded like gunfire, echoing faintly through time. He leaned back, eyes closing, the ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. Somewhere beyond the edge of Tarkesh IX, the Vrask would be rebuilding, adapting, learning. Mason knew this wasn't the end. It never was. But for now, they had bought the galaxy a little more time to breathe. As the ship slipped into orbit, General Torkith's final report, transmitted to the Fleet Command, contained only one line beneath the casualty figures and tactical data. Humans brought a monster. And it fought for us. Mason looked down at his gloved hands, still blackened with gunpowder, and whispered to himself, We didn't bring a monster. We just remembered what it takes to kill one.